Hello everyone, welcome back. This is vlog number 10. For this one I'm doing something a little bit exactly the same. I'm back playing more 2-5 no limit at the Bellagio. These hands were recorded on September 9th, 2022. I want to thank everyone for commenting on the last video. I did see that a lot of people want to see me do a 1-3 vlog, so I do plan to do that sometime in the near future. And I want to thank everyone again for subscribing. My goal is still 1,000, but we're creeping up there. We're getting there. So I do appreciate everyone for watching and subscribing. I once again show you every starting hand I get for the whole night. And toward the end of the vlog, I'm once again going to tell you what the opponent has and not what I have, and ask you to tell me what you think I have and what you would do if you were the opponent in this situation. I kept seeing in all the comments to my videos, Kevin, your vlogs aren't long enough. We want to see more hands. So this one's a little bit longer. I think we're coming in at about 35 minutes. In all seriousness, it's because I've played a lot more hands in this one. My range was very wide. And rather than cut a bunch of hands, I tried to put them all in there for you, so hopefully you enjoy them. I get into a pretty good game. There's some locals here, but there's also some tourists who are pushing some money around, and I actually pick up a tell on one of the tourists who has a pretty big stack, and you'll see that in a lot of the hands tonight. And that player has been in a feud with one of the locals, so they're kind of pushing money back and forth at each other and being a little bit aggressive, so I try to get involved in a lot of hands with those two players based on that dynamic. You'll see a lot of interesting hands, I think, and I hope you enjoy it. And without further ado, let's get to the hands. I once again buy in for the table max of 500 at a Bellagio 2-5 game. And it takes about 11 or 12 hands before I get involved in something sort of interesting here. In this first hand, I have Jack 7 of spades on the button. It gets folded to me and I raise to 20. Both the small blind and the big blind call. The flop is King of Hearts, 10 of Hearts, 2 of Clubs. So not a whole lot going on for me there, but it seems like those cards should be in my range raising, even though button raise could mean a wider range than a raise from another position. It gets checked to me. I bet 30, and both players call. The turn is the 8 of spades, and after getting called by 2 people on the flop, when it gets checked to me, I decide to just go ahead and check it back with a gut shot here and try to see if I can't get there. The river is the 4 of clubs, so there's not a whole lot on this board for me. It gets checked to me for a third time, and I have the option here of just giving up and probably most assuredly losing with Jack high, or taking a stab at it. Nobody seems super interested in it so far, even though both called on the flop. So I do go ahead and bet 75, trying to see if I can't take this pot down. The small blind, who's a new vlog subscriber and friend, calls with King Queen offsuit, and that's a pretty good hand. So he wins this one. I think he played this one well. After I raised pre-flop, he went ahead and just checked it to me on all the streets. And once again, I start a session bluffing off some money and being down. It's not a great way to start a session. I should probably stop doing that. So after this hand, I lost about 130, and I add on another $100. 3 hands later, I'm in the low jack with King Jack offsuit. Under the gun raises to 20. I call, the hijack calls, and the small blind calls. The flop is 7 of hearts, Queen of spades, 10 of spades, so I flop a nice open-ender with an over, and it gets checked around. The turn is a good one. It's the ace of clubs, giving me Broadway and the nuts. It gets checked to me. I bet 30, and the hijack calls. The river is the 7 of diamonds. That's not great because it pairs the board, but I don't expect him to have a full house here. The way the hand's been played pretty weak, it would be pretty surprising for him to have that. I lead for 85, and he unfortunately folds this one. 4 hands later, I'm in the small blind with pocket jacks. The under the gun player limps. The cutoff raises to 20. I 3-bet to 75, and everybody folds. 3-bet's good here. I'm happy winning this without a call or 4-bet. Definitely don't love a 4-bet when I have jacks, especially in a 2-5 game. Most people 4-betting would have at worst ace-king and very likely a bigger pocket pair. So happy to just take this one down without a battle. 2 hands later, I have 6-7 offsuit in the cutoff. The low jack limps, I raise to 20, and everyone folds except the low jack. The flop is ace of spades, 10 of spades, 8 of hearts. So I have a gut shot, but not much else going on here, although this looks like a pretty good flop for my range, I think. Despite my thoughts of this looking good for my range, the low jack leads for 20. Usually someone leading into a raiser is generally pretty weak, like a one pair kind of hand, but not always. People obviously play differently. The board is fairly wet with straight draws and flush draws, so I could see a two pair or something leading here. I figure I'll call here with a gut shot, and I'm figuring I'll probably raise a turn depending on what comes, thinking that he most likely has a one pair kind of hand and maybe not even that strong of a one pair hand based on his flop lead. The turn is a good one. It's the 9 of spades, giving me the low end of the straight. That also puts 3 spades on the board, so I have to be a little careful here. He leads for 45, and at the time, felt like I almost certainly had the best hand. I don't think a flush probably plays the hand the way that he's playing it, and I don't know that a straight would play it that way either. So I just call, thinking I can probably get him to bet more money at the river, and I can pick off some bluffs or worse hands. But in retrospect, I think raising here is probably smart. There's 3 spades on the board. There's 8, 9, 10 for a lot of other straight draws that are better than mine on the board. I think that I need to raise here for protection, and if he happens to 3-bet me or shove, then I have a predicament to decide whether I think he has a better straight or a flush. But at the time, I thought, let me just call and let him keep betting at me. Maybe I'll win some more money. The river is the 2 of diamonds, so that one's pretty bricky. This time he leads at me for 105, and now I think about raising again, but I just don't know what worse can call a raise here. I have the bottom end of the straight. A raise almost certainly represents at least a straight or a flush, and I just don't think anything worse than the bottom end straight could really call a raise here unless he just thought I was bluffing. So I don't think this is one of those hands that I can really raise for value, but I do end up just calling. He says he has a 9 but doesn't show, so he probably had something like Jack 9 for a straight draw. 3 hands later, I have the best starting hand possible, the +1, pocket aces. The under the gun player raises to 20. I raise to 60. Everyone else folds except for the under the gun player who calls. The flop is Jack 7-3 with 2 diamonds. He checks to me. I bet 65. And he calls. The turn is the 2 of hearts. He checks to me. I bet 150, and he folds instantly. Alright, 2 hands later, I'm in the big blind with Queen 10 offsuit. The low jack limps, the hijack limps, the button limps, and this is a tough spot for me, not because it's a tough decision on whether to call. Obviously, I'm not folding. But Queen 10's not a great hand, but at the same time, I also don't want to be in the pot with this many people. So I raised to 25 into the big blind with a pretty marginal hand, and they all call. So trying to thin out the field with a raise did not do much here. The flop is ace of hearts, 10 of hearts, jack of spades. So I flop bottom pair and a gut shot. I could easily have raised with an ace here, or even a king queen. So I lead for 50. And everybody calls. The turn is the ace of spades, and that's a pretty bad card to keep bluffing on. Now it's much less likely that I have one of those. I decide that bluffing into 3 players a second time is not the best idea, especially on this card. I check. It gets checked to the hijack, who bets 130. The button calls, and everyone else folds, including me. Next hand. Okay, it's actually not the next hand, but it's 2 hands later. I have Queen King offsuit on the button. The hijack raises to 15. I call 15, and the small blind also calls 15. The flop is 8 of clubs, 8 of hearts, king of clubs. That seems like a pretty good flop. The hijack bets 30. I call, and the small blind folds. The turn is about the best card you could ask for. It's the king of hearts. So top full house seems pretty good to me. The hijack bets 80, and I don't think there's any reason to raise here. I'm in position, and if he wants to keep betting, I'm happy to let him do that. So I just call here. If he's got some sort of heart draw or something, or a club draw, I'll let him draw to that. I'm not afraid of that hand. The river is the 4 of clubs, so the front door flush draw does come in. This time he checks. I think my hand's pretty face up here, but I'm never checking back, and I don't know that the size of the bet matters too much. Maybe if I bet something smaller, he thinks I'm weaker, but I don't know. I don't think I'm getting any kind of a call here unless I bet something like $40 or $50, and I want to give him a chance to call off or think I might be bluffing. So I bet 200 and he folds, but I'll take the win here. 7 hands later, I'm on the button with pocket 5s. The under the gun straddle is on. The hijack raises to 25. I call 25, and the straddler also calls 25. The flop is 4, 9, 10 with the 9, 10 of diamonds, and it gets checked around. The turn is the king of diamonds. It gets checked to me. The straddler could of course have anything, but I would expect a bet from the hijack raiser if he has any of this board on the flop or on the turn, especially on this board with straight draws and diamond draw on the flop and then the diamond coming in on the turn with a king. So I think they feel pretty weak to me. So I bet 60 and the straddler calls 60. That's obviously not what I want to see here with a pair of 5s and a bad diamond draw. I'm hoping that he has a straight draw or a flush draw and that he's just drawing. I can think of only 2 cards that I'd like to see on the river, and the 5 of clubs is one of them. That's kind of a bingo card. If obviously there's still a straight that could be out there and there's also diamonds that could be out there, so I have to be a little careful, but it gets checked to me again, so I don't put him on any of those hands. I think if he had a straight or a flush, this player would for sure be betting, not checking for a check raise, especially this particular player. So I bet 150 and he folds pretty fast. So I think my read or hope on the turn of him having a straight or a flush draw was probably pretty accurate, and he just misses on this 5 of clubs. So I probably didn't even need to hit that set. My hand's probably just good, but it sure makes it a lot easier to bet 150 when you hit your set as opposed to completely bricking out. 5 hands later, I'm on the button again, the under the gun straddle is on again, and I have pocket 6s. Also again, the hijack raises to 25. I call, the small blind calls, and now the straddler raises to 125. You can see he only has about 175 behind here, so it's not worth trying to set mine on this one. The odds of you flopping a set, as you probably know, are 8 to 1. Definitely not getting paid 8 to 1 on this particular player with his stack. So I fold, and so does everybody else. The very next hand, I'm in the cutoff with ace queen of diamonds. The low jack raises to 15. I 3-bet to 55, and everybody folds. 4 hands later, I'm in the big blind with the second best hand possible, 8-7 offsuit. It folds to the button, who raises to 15. The small blind calls. I feel pretty good in this game, and like I said, I feel like I have a read on a couple of these players and picked up a tell on one of these players. So I call for 10 more and figure I'll see what comes on the flop. The flop is 7 of diamonds, 8 of diamonds, 9 of hearts. So I flop bottom 2 pair on a very wet, actiony board with a lot of straight draws and also the diamond draws out there. The small blind leads for 30. I think I probably should be raising most of the time here, but in this instance with these players, I decided to just call, see what comes on the turn, and try to let them keep pumping money into the pot without giving up the strength of my hand at this point. And the button also calls. The turn is the 7 of spades, so that's about the most perfect card you could ask for. Now, I'm stoked I didn't raise the flop. Doesn't mean it was right, but in this particular instance, I think my hand is a lot more disguised. The small blind checks. I do decide to check here. There's still so many draws out there. I want to let someone either bluff at it or they can catch up with a straight or a flush. So I'm happy checking it back here. Although I think betting also makes some good sense, because if there's someone on a straight or a flush draw, they'd probably call a small bet. I think betting here, something like $50 to $60 is probably better than checking, but in the moment I check, and the button checks behind as well. The river is the 4 of hearts, so the flush misses, the small blind checks, And now I have to bet. So I bet 115, which I think has to look kind of fishy here with me just calling a flop and checking on the turn when the 7 hit. The button folds, and I think the small blind also thinks my bet looks fishy. He calls, I show my full house and win. He doesn't show, so I'm not sure what he was calling with here. 2 hands later, I'm on the button with the third best hand possible. Pocket queens. The under the gun player raises to 15. The hijack 3 bets to 45. I 4 bet here to 125. The under the gun player folds, but the hijack calls. So we're going heads up to a flop. The flop is 4 of clubs, king of hearts, 4 of spades. That is not the best flop for me. It gets checked to me. I still think I need to bet here as the 4-better pre-flop. So I bet 80, and he folds. There's a little bit of a lull after this hand. Things are going pretty well so far, no big complaints. My game seems good. My friend John stops by to say hello.
It's Kevin from the internet.
He likes to pretend that anyone knows who I am in the poker room. They don't. This next hand I'm going to talk about, I have the 4th best hand possible. If it were suited, which it isn't, but that's ace-king. I'm in the small blind. The low jack raises to 15. The cutoff calls. I 3-bet to 50, and only the cutoff calls. The flop is queen of spades, 7 of clubs, 8 of clubs. That's not the greatest flop, but I lead for 65, and he calls. The turn is the queen of clubs. That brings in the flush, and also any queen is now a pretty strong hand. I could be betting here, but I think most hands I'd be betting would only have a queen in them. I probably wouldn't be betting aces or kings here. I'd probably be check calling on this board. I do have the king of clubs, but I'm not really going to use that as a reason to call a huge bet if he makes one, or make my own huge bet here. So I think a check is appropriate. I do check, and he bets 200. I just don't think this is a good card to call on, even with the king of clubs, and I don't think it's a good card to bluff on either, so I decided to just let this one go. 4 hands later, I'm in the low jack, and I have the best starting hand possible. Pocket aces. The under the gun straddle is on. I raise to 30, and the straddler is the only caller. The flop is jack of clubs, jack of diamonds, 2 of hearts. That's a pretty good flop as long as he doesn't have a jack. He checks to me, I bet 50, and he folds. So I feel pretty confident he did not have a jack. 6 hands later, I'm in the cutoff with ace-8 of diamonds. The low jack limps, I limp, the button raises to 20, the small blind calls, the big blind calls, the low jack calls, and I call. So we're 5 ways to a flop. The flop is 9 of hearts, 9 of clubs, 2 of spades. So I missed that by all of it. It gets checked to the button. He bets 80, and everyone folds to me. And I think he has to have missed this flop unless he just has some random 9. It just doesn't seem like this is the kind of flop that's going to hit his range. Maybe he has an overpair, but I think with all those limpers, an overpair probably raises more than 20. So I think he likely has some sort of hand like king queen suited or ace jack, something like that. So I think about raising here and getting a little crazy just because I don't see how this flop could have hit him. But I decide to not do that. I get myself in trouble doing things like that. So I decided to just go ahead and let this one go and not mess around. Apparently I stopped my camera a little early before I fold, but you can trust me. I let this one go here. And after the hand, he shows me pocket 2s. So he flopped a full house, and me raising here would not have worked out very well for me. It would have worked out pretty well for him, but not for me. So good thing I didn't go crazy here, and I just let this one go. About 40 minutes and 19 or 20 hands go by before I'm dealt the 4th best starting hand possible if it were suited. And it is ace king of clubs in the big blind. The under the gun player accidentally raises to 10. He didn't mean to, he just accidentally dropped out $10. The low jack calls 10, the button calls 10, and I raise to 55. I'm actually hoping someone thinks that I'm just trying to exploit the fact that he raised to 10 and I'll get some action with my ace king suited, but unfortunately, everybody folds here. The very next hand, I'm in the small blind with pocket fives. The +1 player raises to 25, and everybody folds except me. I call. The flop is Jack, Jack, 6 with 2 diamonds. That's not the worst flop for pocket fives, I don't think. I check. He bets 35, and I call. I don't think he probably has a jack here or an actual overpair. They're probably Broadway type cards. I feel like fives are probably good here. The turn is the 3 of diamonds, which does bring in the diamond draw. I don't think he probably has that either. I check, and he checks behind. So when he checks behind, I feel pretty good that my fives are probably the best hand here. I think anything like pocket 8s or pocket 9s probably keeps betting here. A jack, I think for sure bets here to protect against a 4th diamond. This guy has been not afraid of flushes hitting on turns or rivers pretty much all night. He's been betting into them and calling them down. So I don't think he would be afraid of the diamond necessarily. So I think any overpair, any jack, or even any middling kind of pair that's above 5s probably keeps betting here, especially this player. The river is the 10 of hearts. I don't love that card. I think he has a lot of hands that could have a 10 in them, something like an ace 10 or a king 10 suited, 10 jack suited, something like that. So 10 of hearts isn't my favorite card. I check. Here he bets 80, and I'm really only afraid of him possibly hitting a 10. I think if he doesn't hit a 10, my hand's probably good. I even say so to him while I'm thinking about calling. I don't know, man. I think I've got the best hand unless you hit a 10. Would you think fives are good here? Would you make this call? It's not a huge bet, but it is an interesting spot. I do call. He shows ace king of hearts, and I end up winning this pot. 3 hands later in the hijack, I have the second best starting hand possible, pocket kings. The +1 player raises to 15. I raise to 45, and he calls. The flop is queen, ace, 6 rainbow, because of course it is. He checks to me. I bet 60 because I feel like I kind of have to bet this, and he calls. So that's not great. The turn is the 10 of diamonds. That's even worse. Now a lot of straight draws have come in on this card, and now there's 2 diamonds on the board. He checks, and I'm not betting this one again right now. I'll take my gut shot equity. Checks around. The river is the 8 of diamonds, so that's even worse server again. Now there's more straights, and the diamond draw came in. He leads for 125, and I beat nothing. Except just a stone cold bluff, absolutely nothing, and it doesn't really seem like he could have any bluffs here. He calls the flop. He has to have either had an ace or had a straight draw, and all of those things came in. So nothing I can really do but let this one go. Stupid kings. About 15 or 16 hands go by. I get involved a little bit, win a couple small pots, but nothing too exciting happens. And then in this hand, I'm under the gun with 10 jack of clubs. I decide to raise this to 20, mostly because I feel comfortable in this game, although I do like 10 jack suited. The big blind is the only player who calls. This is the guy that I picked up a tell on pretty early in the night, and so far the tell has been accurate approximately 100% of the time for the hours I've been playing in this game. I've been picking my spots pretty sporadically on when to use it to my advantage. I haven't been raising every single pot he's in or anything like that, but trying to pick good spots. The flop is queen of hearts, queen of spades, king of hearts. So I'm open-ended, but that's a pretty scary looking board even if you're trying to make a straight. He leads for 25, and the tell that I've picked up all night, he shows me once again, which is a tell when he's bluffing. So I just call thinking that I'm probably going to be raising at some point in the future unless something changes. The turn is another queen, the queen of diamonds. He bets 60 on this card. And again, I pick up the same tell. If you're going to play poker, you got to play your reads. You got to play what you pick up on other people. So I pull the trigger on a raise to 160 here with just an open-ended straight draw on a board with 3 queens, and he folds. Here my read pays off, and I'm able to take a pot I probably don't deserve because of it. 3 hands later, I'm in the small blind with 2-3 of spades. The cutoff raises to 25. That's the same opponent from last hand. So I call, and it's probably not a great hand to be calling with, but since I have this tell on this player, I'm really willing to play a lot of hands with this person. If I hit, I feel like this guy can bluff off money, and if I feel like he's bluffing and I don't hit, I feel like I can push him off hands a lot of the time, as long as I pick up on the tell that, like I said, has been pretty consistent. We're heads up, and the flop is ace of hearts, 5 of diamonds, 6 of clubs. So that's a pretty big whiff for me, other than a gut shot straight draw. I check, he bets 25, and once again I pick up on his bluff tell, so I feel pretty confident that he does not have an ace and he does not love this board. So I call for 25 with a gut shot, but I'm really just planning to raise him probably on the turn, which is when most people raise with strong hands. My plan goes out the window when the turn is the 4 of diamonds, giving me a straight. Now I'm for sure checking to let him bluff again. Now if he bets, I don't know if I want to raise him. My plan was to check raise and push him off a bluff, but if I think he's still bluffing and I have a straight, I want to let this guy just keep bluffing. So I probably don't want to check raise a turn, right? This time he bets 55. Once again, I pick up the same tell. So I change my plan and I just call here instead of raising, even though there's 2 diamonds out there, there's diamond draws, and there's of course a lot of bigger straight draws. There's a lot of scary river cards that can come, but I know I have a straight and I know that he's bluffing. The river's one of the worst cards in the deck, I think. It's the 7 of hearts. It doesn't put a flush up, but it does put a 4-liner to the straight up. So any 3 chops with me, and now of course I'm losing to any 8, so I don't love this river card. In fact, you could say I pretty much hate it. I check to him again, thinking that I'm probably going to call whatever he bets, unless I don't pick up on his tell, meaning that he actually probably has an 8. Now he bets 220. That's a pretty real bet, especially after betting 55 on the turn. But once again, I pick up his bluff tell. I have the crappy end of the straight, but I don't think he has it. I also don't think a raise makes any sense here, because if he's bluffing, he can't call a raise, and if I happen to be wrong on my read and he has an 8, I'm just giving him more money, so I don't think a raise makes any sense. So I just call the 220, and as soon as I call, he instantly mucks his hand before I show my cards. After the hand, he asks me what I was calling him with. I tell him I turned a straight.
Turn to straight.
He says he doesn't believe that I turned a straight because I didn't raise him on the turn.
You raise me?
No. I didn't think you had anything.
And I tell him to watch the vlog.
Watch the vlog.
So if you happen to come to the vlog to watch it, there you have it. I did in fact turn a straight. No lies from me here. I might have been a little too busy patting myself on the back over that last hand, because here's a hand I play terribly. Just really awful. I have pocket 8s on the button, the under the gun straddle is on, the +1 player calls 10, the low jack calls 10, and here I raise to 50, which is what I should be saying I did, except I just call here for some stupid reason. Not sure why I did that, to be honest. The small blind and the big blind also call, and the straddle checks, so we're going 7 ways to a flop. The flop is 7 of diamonds, 4 of clubs, 5 of spades. That's actually a pretty great flop for pocket 8s. It sure would be nice if it wasn't me against 6 other people. The straddler bets 35, the low jack calls, the high jack calls, and that's a lot of people in. So I decide to raise to 110 here. The straddler folds, the low jack calls, and the high jack folds. So we're heads up. This player hasn't been here very long, but he's an older gentleman. Looks like he's probably pretty tight. So the turn is the 10 of clubs. He checks to me, so after raising the flop, I bet 180 here, is what I should be saying. But for some reason, I decide to check back after he checks. And the reason actually is that he only has 240 left, and I didn't feel like he was probably going to fold to a shove, but I think after raising the flop, it's just better to put it all in here. The river's the 9 of diamonds, and he leads all in for 240. with this particular player and my image of him, I just don't think that 8s are ever good here. I do fold this one. His wife was watching him play, and she later told me that he had pocket aces. I'm not entirely sure. But either way, I fold and feel like I played this one badly pretty much the entire time. About 11 hands later, I get involved with this hand. This is the hand where I'm going to tell you what the other player has, and I want you to let me know what you would do against my hand and what you think I have. So I'm in the low jack, and the other player is on the button. He has ace 6 of clubs. I limp, the hijack raises to 20, the button with the ace 6 of clubs calls, the big blind calls, and I also call. The flop is 6 of diamonds, ace of spades, 8 of spades. It gets checked to the button, who bets $80. Everyone else folds, and I call. The turn is the 7 of spades. I check again, and he bets 50. I raise to 125, and he calls. The river is the queen of diamonds. I'm first to act, and I put him all in for his last 225. Now I want you to let me know what you think I have in this situation, and I want you to let me know whether you would be calling with 2 pair here, ace 6, or whether you would be folding. Please pause the video, let me know what you think here. He tanks. Says if I have it, I have it. He calls. I show 10-6 of spades for a turn flush, and I win a pretty nice one. This is a player who was in a feud with the guy with the tell, and he had called down some hands against him where the other guy made straights and flushes. So my range was pretty wide here, admittedly, but I felt like if I made a straight or a flush and he made a real hand, he'd probably pay me off. So when I feel that's a likely scenario and the guy with the tell was also in this hand, my range is pretty wide because I feel like I have a lot of playability here where I can outmaneuver somewhat and get good value if I make a hand and maybe even push people off a pot if the guy with the tell's bluffing. About 15 hands later, I'm in the big blind with the monstrous 7-8 offsuit again. The low jack limps. The hijack raises to 20. The button calls 20. This is the guy with the tell. I like to play pots with this guy, so I call 20. The low jack calls. The flop is jack, 5, queen, rainbow, and it gets checked around. The turn is the ace of clubs, so this board's pretty bad for my hand, and it gets checked around again. The river's the 10 of clubs, which puts a 4-liner to the straight up there for the king. It gets checked to the button, the guy with the tell. He bets 40, and I pick up the tell again. It's a bluff. Everyone seems very weak to me since I got checked to the button on 3 streets. So I take this opportunity here to raise what I'm pretty sure is a bluff to 135 with 8 high. The low jack and the hijack both fold, and the button folds pretty quick. So once again, my read on this guy's tell comes through, and I take another pot that I probably don't deserve with 8 high. I'm told good bluff.
That's a good bluff, eh?
So I show it here, and the crowd goes sort of wild. Who doesn't love a good bluff? Alright guys, the last hand of this session happens about 10 hands later. We're playing short-handed. I'm under the gun with pocket 4s. I raise to 20, and the big blind calls. Once again, this is that same player with the tell. The flop is jack, 3, queen, rainbow. He checks to me. I continuation bet for 20, and he calls. The turn is the queen of clubs. He checks to me again. I bet 45, and he calls again. The river's the ace of clubs. That's a pretty terrible board for pocket 4s, especially after getting called twice. So when he checks to me, I check behind. I show pocket 4s, and he says that he's embarrassed to say that pocket 4s are good. So even though I have a tell on this guy, it's related to him bluffing, and he didn't ever bluff here. He just check called. So I didn't know where I was at in this hand. Wasn't wanting to bet the river on this board, which is probably about as bad as you could get for pocket 4s, but somehow it ends up winning. 230, in for 600, out for 1610 for a win of 1010, and I will take it. Had a pretty good night and finally had a good game. There were even some locals in this game, but it was pretty actiony, and there were a couple guys who weren't locals who were dumping some money, so pretty happy about it. It was a good session, and hopefully they'll keep going well. Alright, I want to thank everyone for watching this vlog. I'm going to keep this outro short. I'm just going to put on the screen my sessions since the last vlog so you can keep up with how I'm doing and what my overall win-loss is. I hope you enjoyed this video, and hopefully we'll see you next time.